Continuing with Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, we're going to be continuing with rule number 8, which is to tell the truth, or at least don't lie. This section to rule number 8 is titled Manipulate the World. I believe it's the longest section in the entire book. So let's get started. While I have a second here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Manipulate the world. You can use words to manipulate the world into delivering what you want. This is what it means to act politically. This is spin. We learn about that in journalism school. I wrote a book called Gonzo Education. It's in the jar. Okay, it's the specialty of unscrupulous marketers, salesmen, advertisers, pickup artists, slogan-possessed utopians, and psychopaths. It's the speech people engage in when they attempt to influence and manipulate others. It's what university students do when they write an essay to please the professor instead of articulating and clarifying their own ideas. It's what everyone else does when they want something and decide to falsify themselves to please and flatter. It's scheming and sloganeering in propaganda. I'm not going to stop. Well, hey, kitty. I'm not going to stop because I'm going to try to get through this within like 30 minutes. Like I said, it's the longest section of the book. To conduct life, this is to become possessed by some ill-formed desire, and then to craft speech and action in a manner that appears likely, rational, to bring about that end. Typical calculated ends might include to impose my ideological beliefs, to prove that I am or was right, to appear competent, to ratchet myself up the dominance hierarchy, to avoid responsibility or its twin, to garner credit for others' actions, to be promoted, to attract the lion's share of attention, to ensure that everyone likes me, to garner the benefits of martyrdom, to justify my cynicism, to rationalize my antisocial outlook, to minimize immediate conflict, to maintain my naivety, to capitalize on my vulnerability, to always appear as the sainted one, or this one is particularly evil, to ensure that it is always my unloved child's fault. These are all examples of what Sigmund Freud's compatriot, the lesser-known Australian psychologist Alfred Adler, calls life lies. Aren't we all living a life lie? Someone living a life lie is attempting to manipulate reality with perception, thought, and action, so that only somewhat narrowly designed and predefined outcome is allowed to exist. Everybody does that. A life lived in this manner is based, consciously or unconsciously, on two premises. The first is that current knowledge is sufficient to define what is good, unquestionably far into the future. The second is that reality would be unbearable if left to its own devices. The first presumption is philosophically unjustifiable. What you are currently aiming at might not be worth attaining, just as what you are currently doing might be an error. The second is even worse. It is valid only if reality is intrinsically intolerable and simultaneously something that can be successfully manipulated and distorted. Such speaking and thinking requires the arrogance and certainty that English poet John Milton's genius identified with Satan, God's highest angel gone most spectacularly wrong. The faculty of rationality inclines dangerously to pride. All I know is that needs to be known. Pride falls in love with its own creation and tries to make them absolute. I have seen people define their utopia and then bend their lives into knots trying to make it reality. A left-leaning student adopts a trendy, anti-authority stance and spends the next 20 years working resentfully to topple with the windmills of his imagination. An 18-year-old decides, arbitrarily, that she wants to retire at 52. She works for 3 decades to make that happen, failing to notice that she made the decision when she was little more than a child. What did she know about her 52-year-old self when still a teenager? Even now, many years later, she has only the vaguest, lowest resolution idea of her post-work Eden. I'm trying to ruin the 12 rules for life! The kitty's got it off! Keanu, stop it! Moses ain't that kind of kitty. Even now, many years later, she has only the vaguest, lowest resolution idea of her post-work Eden. She refuses to notice. What did her life mean? If that initial goal was wrong, she's afraid of opening Pandora's box, where all the troubles of the world reside, but hope is in there too. Instead, she warps her life to fit the fantasies of a sheltered adolescent. Stop it! How am I supposed to punish a cat? A naively formulated goal transmutes with time into the sinister form of a life lie. One 40-something client told me his vision, formulated by his younger self. I see myself retired, sitting on a tropical beach, drinking margaritas in the sunshine. That's not a plan, that's a travel poster. After 18 margaritas, you're fit only to await the hangover. After 3 weeks of margarita-filled days, if you have any sense, you're bored, stiff, and still disgusted. In a year or less, you're pathetic. It's just not a sustainable approach to later life. I know, I feel the same way. Like, oh, where do you want to be in 5 years? Sitting on a beach with a margarita, like, what the fuck? In a year or less, you're pathetic. It's just not a sustainable approach to later life. This kind of oversimplification and falsification is particularly typical of ideologues. They adopt a single axiom: government is bad, immigration is bad, capitalism is bad, patriarchy is bad. Then they filter and screen their experiences and insist even more narrowly that everything can be explained by the axiom. They believe, narcissistically, underneath all the bad theory, that the world could be put right if only they held the controls. There is another fundamental problem, too, with the life lie, particularly when it's based in avoidance. A sin of commission occurs when you do something you know to be wrong. A sin of omission occurs when you let something bad happen when you could do something to stop it. The former is regarded, classically, as more serious than the latter, than avoidance. I'm not so sure. Bad things happen when good men do nothing. Consider the person who insists that everything is right in her life. She avoids conflict and smiles and does what she is asked to. She finds a niche and hides in it. She does not question authority or put her own ideas forward and does not complain when mistreated. She strives for invisibility, like a fish in the center of a swarming school. But a secret unrest gnaws at her heart. She is still suffering because life is suffering. She is lonesome and isolated and unfulfilled, but her obedience and self-obliteration eliminate all the meaning from her life. She has become nothing but a slave, a tool for others to exploit. She does not get what she wants or needs because doing so would mean speaking her mind. So there is nothing of value in her existence to counterbalance life's troubles, and that makes her sick. It might be the noisy troublemakers who disappear first when the institution you serve falters and shrinks, but it's the invisible who will be sacrificed next. Someone hiding is not someone vital. Vitality requires original contribution. Hiding also does not save the conforming and conventional form, disease, insanity, death, and taxes. And hiding from others also means suppressing and hiding the potentialities of the unrealized self. And that's the problem. If you reveal yourself to others, you cannot reveal yourself to yourself. That does not only mean that you suppress who you are, although it also means that. It means that so much of what you could be will never be forced by necessity to come forward. This is a biological truth as well as a conceptual truth. When you explore boldly, when you voluntarily confront the unknown, you gather information and build your renewed self out of that information. That is the conceptual element. However, researchers have recently discovered that new genes in the central nervous system turn themselves on when an organism is placed or places itself in a new situation. These genes code for new proteins. These proteins are the building blocks for new structures in the brain. This means that a lot of you is still nascent in the most physical of senses. You will not be called forth by stasis. You have to say something, go somewhere, and do things to get turned on. And, if not, you remain incomplete. And life is too hard for anyone incomplete. If you say no to your boss or your spouse or your mother when it needs to be said, then you transform yourself into someone who can say no when it needs to be said. If you say yes when no needs to be said, however, you transform yourself into someone who can only say yes even when it is fairly clearly time to say no. If you ever wonder how perfectly ordinary, decent people could find themselves doing the terrible things the Gulag camp guards did, you now have your answer. By the time no was seriously needed to be said, there was no one left capable of saying it. If you betray yourself, you say untrue things. If you act out a lie, you weaken your character. If you have a weak character, then adversity will mow you down when it appears, as it will, inevitably. You will hide, but there will be no place left to hide, and then you will find yourself doing terrible things. Only the most cynical, hopeless philosophy insists that reality could be improved through falsification. Such a philosophy judges being and becoming alike, and deems them flawed. It denounces truth as insufficient and the honest man as deluded. It is a philosophy that both brings about and then justifies the endemic corruption of the world. It is not a vision as such, and not a plan devised to achieve a vision. That is at fault under such circumstances. A vision of a future, the desirable future, is necessary. Such a vision links action taken now with important, long-term, foundational values. It lends action to the present significance and importance. It provides a frame limiting uncertainty and anxiety. It's not vision. It is instead willful blindness. It's the worst sort of lie. It's subtle. It avails itself of easy rationalizations. Willful blindness is the refusal to know something that could be known. It's a refusal to admit that the knocking sound means someone's at the door. It's a refusal to acknowledge the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the elephant under the carpet, the skeleton in the closet. It's a refusal to admit to error while pursuing the plan. Every game has rules. Some of the most important rules are implicit. You accept them merely by deciding to play the game. The first of these rules is that the game is important. If it wasn't important, you wouldn't be playing it. Playing a game defines it as important. The second is that moves undertaken during the game are valid if they help you win. If you make a move and it isn't helping you win, then, by definition, it's a bad move. You need to try something different. You remember the old joke. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. If you're lucky and you fail and you try something new, you move ahead. If that doesn't work, you try something different again. A minor modification will suffice in fortunate circumstances. It is therefore prudent to begin with small changes and see if they help. Sometimes, however, the entire hierarchy of values is faulty, and the whole edifice has to be abandoned. The whole game must be changed. That's a revolution, with all the chaos and terror of a revolution. It's not something to be engaged in lightly, but it's something necessary. Error necessitates sacrifice to correct it, and serious error necessitates serious sacrifice. To accept the truth means to sacrifice, and if you have rejected the truth for a long time, then you run up a dangerously large sacrificial debt. Forest fires burned out dead wood and returned trapped elements to the soil. Sometimes, however, fires are suppressed artificially. That does not stop the dead wood from accumulating. Sooner or later, a fire will start. When it does, it will burn so hot that everything will be destroyed, even the soil in which the forest grows. The prideful, rational mind, comfortable with its certainty, enamored of its own brilliance, is easily tempted to ignore error and to sweep dirt under the rug. Literary, existential philosophers, beginning with Soren Kierkegaard, conceived of this mode of being as inauthentic. An inauthentic person continues to perceive and act in ways his own experience has demonstrated false. He does not speak his own voice. Did what I want happen? No. Then my aim or my methods were wrong. I still have something to learn. That is the voice of authenticity. Did what I want happen? No. Then the world is unfair. People are jealous and too stupid to understand. It is the fault of something or someone else. That is the voice of inauthenticity. It is not too far from there to, they should be stopped, or they must be hurt, or they must be destroyed. Whenever you hear about something incomprehensible, brutal, such ideas have manifested themselves. There is no blaming any of this on unconsciousness either, or repression. When the individual lies, he knows it. He may blind himself to the consequences of his actions. He may fail to analyze and articulate his past so that he does not understand. He may even forget that he lied and be so unconscious of the fact. But he was conscious in the present during the commission of each error and the omission of each responsibility. At that moment he knew what he was up to, and the sins of the inauthentic individual compound and corrupt the state. Someone power-hungry makes a new rule at your workplace. It's unnecessary. It's counterproductive. It's an irritant. It removes some of the pleasure and meaning from your work. But you tell yourself it's all right. It's not worth complaining about. Then it happens again. You've already trained yourself to allow such things by failing to react the first time. You're a little less courageous. Your opponent, unopposed, is a little bit stronger. The institution is a little more corrupt. The process of bureaucratic stagnation and oppression is underway, and you've contributed by pretending that it was okay. Why not complain? Why not take a stand? If you do, other people, equally afraid to speak up, may come to your defense. And if not, maybe it's time for a revolution. Maybe you should find a job somewhere else, where your soul is less in danger from corruption. For what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Mark chapter 8, verse 36. One of the major contributions of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's masterwork, the Gulag Archipelago, was his analysis of the direct causal relationship between the pathology of the Soviet prison work camp dependent state, where millions suffered and died, and the almost universal proclivity of the Soviet citizen to falsify his own day-to-day personal experience, deny his own state-induced suffering, and thereby prop up the dictates of the rational, ideology-possessed communist system. It was this bad faith, this denial, that in Solzhenitsyn's opinion aided and abetted that great paranoid mass murderer Joseph Stalin in his crimes. Solzhenitsyn wrote the truth. His truth, hard learned through his own experience in the camps, exposed the lies of the Soviet state. No educated person dared defend that ideology again after Solzhenitsyn published the Gulag Archipelago. No one could ever say again, what Stalin did, that was not true communism. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Nazi concentration camp survivor who wrote the classic Man's Search for Meaning, drew a similar social psychological conclusion. Deceitful, inauthentic individual existence is the precursor to social totalitarianism. Sigmund Freud, for his part, analogously believed that repression contributed to a non-trivial manner in the development of mental illness, and the difference between repression of truth and a lie is a matter of decree, not kind. Alfred Adler knew it was lies that bred sickness. C.G. Jung knew that moral problems plagued his patients, and that such problems were caused by untruth. All these thinkers, all centrally concerned with pathology, both individual and cultural, came to the same conclusion. Lies warp the structure of being. Untruth corrupts the soul and the state alike, and one form of corruption feeds the other. I have repeatedly observed the transformation of mere existential misery into outright hell by betrayal and deceit. The barely manageable crisis of a patient's terminal illness can be turned, for example, into something awful beyond description by the unseemly and petty squabbling of the sufferer's adult children. Obsessed by the unresolved past, they gather like ghouls around their deathbed, forcing tragedy into unholy dalliance with cowardice and resentment. The inability of a son to thrive independently is exploited by a mother bent on shielding her child from all disappointment and pain. He never leaves, and she is never lonely. It's an evil conspiracy, forged slowly as the pathology unfolds by thousands of knowing winks and nods. She plays the martyr, doomed to support her son, and garners nourishing sympathy like a vampire from supporting friends. He broods in his basement, imagining himself oppressed. He fantasizes with delight about the havoc he might wreak on the world that rejected him for his cowardice, awkwardness, and inability. And sometimes he wreaks precisely that havoc, and everyone asks why. They could know, but refuse to. Even well-lived lives can, of course, be warped and hurt and twisted by illness and infirmity and uncontrollable catastrophe. Depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia, like cancer, all involve biological factors beyond the individual's immediate control. The difficulties intrinsic to life itself are sufficient to weaken and overwhelm each of us, pushing us beyond our limits, breaking us at our weakest point. Not even the best lived lives provide an absolute defiance against vulnerability. But the family that fights in the ruins of their earthquake-devastated dwelling place is much less likely to rebuild than the family made strong by mutual trust and devotion. Any natural weakness or existential challenge, no matter how minor, can be magnified into a serious crisis with enough deceit in the individual family or culture. The honest human spirit may continually fail in its attempt to bring about paradise on earth. It may manage, however, to reduce the suffering attendant to our existence to bearable levels. The tragedy of being is the consequence of our limitations and the vulnerability defining human experience. It may even be the price we pay for being itself, since existence must be limited to be at all. I have seen a husband adapt honestly and courageously while his wife descended into terminal dementia. He made the necessary adjustments step by step. He accepted help when he needed it. He refused to deny her sad deterioration, and the manner adapted gracefully to it. I saw the family of that same woman come together in a supporting and sustaining manner as she lay dying and gain newfound connections with each other, brothers, sisters, grandchildren, and father, as partial but genuine compensation for their loss. I have seen my teenage daughter live through the destruction of her hip and her ankle and survive 2 years of continual intense pain and emerge with her spirit intact. I watched her younger brother voluntarily and without resentment sacrifice many opportunities for friendship and social engagement to stand by her and us while she suffered. With love, encouragement, and character intact, a human being can be resilient beyond imagining. What cannot be borne, however, is the absolute ruin produced by tragedy and deception. The capacity of the rational mind to deceive, manipulate, scheme, trick, falsify, minimize, mislead, betray, prevaricate, deny, omit, rationalize, bias, exaggerate, and obscure is endless, so remarkable that centuries of pre-scientific thought, concentrating on clarifying the nature of moral endeavor, regarded it as positively demonic. This is not because of rationality itself as a process. That process can produce clarity and progress. It is because rationality is subject to the single worst temptation, to raise what is known now to the status of an absolute. We can turn to the great poet John Milton once again to clarify just what this means. Over thousands of years of history, the Western world wrapped a dreamlike fantasy about the nature of evil around its central religious core. That fantasy has a protagonist, an adversarial personality, absolutely dedicated to the corruption of being. Milton took it upon himself to organize, dramatize, and articulate the essence of this collective dream, and gave it life in the figure of Satan, Lucifer, the light bearer. He writes of Lucifer's primal temptation and its immediate consequence. He trusted to have equaled the Most High, if he opposed and with ambition aimed against the thorn and monarchy of God, raised impious war in heaven and battle proud, with vain attempt, him the almighty power, hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell, in adamantine chains and penal fire. Lucifer in Milton's eyes, the spirit of reason, was the most wondrous angel brought forth from the void by God. This can be read psychologically. Reason is something alive. It lives in all of us. It's older than any of us. It's best understood as a personality, not a faculty. It has aims and its temptations and its weaknesses. It flies higher and sees further than any other spirit. But reason falls in love with itself, and worse, it falls in love with its own productions. It elevates them and worships them as absolutes. Lucifer is, therefore, the spirit of totalitarianism. He is flung from heaven into hell because of such elevation, such rebellion against the highest and incomprehensible, inevitably produces hell. Such rebellion against the higher and incomprehensible inevitably produces hell. Such rebellion against the highest and incomprehensible inevitably produces hell. To say it again, it is the greatest temptation within the rational faculty to glorify its own capacity and its own productions, and to claim that, in the face of its theories, nothing transcendent or outside its domain need exist. This means that all important facts have been discovered. This means that nothing important remains unknown. But most importantly, it means denial of the necessity for courageous individual confrontation with being. What is going to save you? The totalitarian says, in essence, you must rely on faith in what you already know. But that is not what saves. What saves is the willingness to learn from what you don't know. This is faith in the possibility of human transformation. That is faith in the sacrifice of the current self for the self that could be. The totalitarian denies the necessity for the individual to take ultimate responsibility for being. That denial is the meaning of rebellion against the Most High. That is what totalitarian means. Everything that needs to be discovered has been discovered. Everything will unfold precisely as planned. All problems will vanish forever, once the perfect system is accepted. Milton's great poem was a prophecy. As rationality rose ascendant from the ashes of Christianity, the great threat of total systems accompanied it. Communism, in particular, was attractive not so much to oppressed workers, its hypothetical beneficiaries, but to intellectuals, to those whose arrogant pride in intellect assured them that they were always right. But the promised utopia never emerged. Instead, humanity experienced the inferno of Stalinist Russia, and Mao's China, and Pol Pot's Cambodia, and the citizens of those states were required to betray their own experience, turn against their fellow citizens, and die in the tens of millions. There is an old Soviet joke: an American dies and goes to hell. Satan himself shows him around. They pass a large cauldron. The American peers in. It's full of suffering souls burning in hot pitch. As they struggle to leave the pot, low-ranking devils sitting on the rim pitchfork them back in. The American is properly shocked. Satan says, "That's where we put sinful Englishmen." The tour continues. Soon the doer approaches a second cauldron. It's slightly larger and slightly hotter. The American peers in. It's also full of suffering souls, all wearing berets. Devils are pitchforking would-be escapees back into the cauldron as well. "That's where we put sinful Frenchmen," Satan says. In the distance is a third cauldron. It's much bigger, and it's glowing white-hot. The American can barely get near it. Nonetheless, at Satan's insistence, he approaches it and peers in. It is absolutely packed with souls, barely visible, under the surface of the boiling liquid. Now and then, however, one clambers out of the pitch and desperately reaches for the rim. Oddly, there are no devils sitting on the edge of the giant pot, but the clamberer disappears back under the surface anyway. The American asks, "Why are there no demons here to keep everyone from escaping?" Satan replies, "This is where we put the Russians. If one tries to escape, the others pull him back in." Milton believed that stubborn refusal to change in the face of error not only meant ejection from heaven and subsequent degeneration into an ever-deepening hell, but the rejection of redemption itself. Satan knows full well, and even he was willing to seek reconciliation, and God willing to grant it. He would only rebel because he would not change. Perhaps it is this prideful stubbornness that constitutes the mysterious, unforgivable sin against the Holy Ghost. Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors! Hail, infernal world, and thou profoundest hell! Receive thy now, possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. This is no afterlife fantasy. This is no perverse realm of post-existence torture for political enemies. This is an abstract idea, and abstractions are often more real than what they represent. The idea that hell exists in some metaphysical manner is not only ancient and pervasive, it's true. Hell is eternal. It has always existed. It exists now. It's the most barren, hopeless, and malevolent subdivision of the underworld of chaos, where disappointment and resentful people forever dwell. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven or hell, a hell of heaven. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition through in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Those who have lied enough in world and action live there, in hell now. Take a walk down any busy urban street. Keep your eyes open and pay attention. You will see people who are there now. These are the people to whom you instinctively give a wide berth. These are the people who are immediately angered if you direct your gaze toward them, although sometimes they will instead turn away in shame. I saw a horribly damaged street alcoholic do exactly that in the presence of my young daughter. He wanted above all to avoid seeing his degraded state incontrovertibly reflected in her eyes. Incontrovertibly reflected in her eyes. It is a deceit that makes people miserable beyond what they can bear. It is deceit that fills human souls with resentment and vengefulness. It is deceit that produces the terrible suffering of mankind, the death camps of the Nazis, the torture chambers and genocides of Stalin, and that even greater monster, Mao. It was deceit that killed hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century. It was deceit that almost doomed civilization itself. It is deceit that still threatens us most profoundly today. That was from rule number 8 in Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. That was one of the longer sections. Rule number 8 is titled Tell the Truth, or at least Don't Lie. And like I said, that was from rule number 8, Tell the Truth, or at least Don't Lie, from Jordan Peterson's outstanding book, 12 Rules for Life. My name is Gregory Brandt. I am also a writer. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and check out my own book. It's a memoir about my life. It's called Gonzo Education. It starts when I drop out of high school and it ends when I graduate from one of the top journalism schools. So I know you'll enjoy it. It's a quick read and it's free on Amazon right now. It's called Gonzo Education. And thanks for listening. Have a nice day.